afternoon. My name is Marnie Wood, and I'm a 30-year resident of Middlebury, Vermont. I'm a retired educator, having taught elementary-age students for more than 3 decades. In my retirement, I'm privileged to serve as a volunteer with Hospice Volunteer Services in Middlebury. I'm here this afternoon to share what I feel is an extremely important viewpoint. The unique and precious view I bring is of my sister Nancy's journey through declining health and toward a choice to hasten the end of her life. And I would just like to also put a face to the person that I'm speaking about. Hers was a beautiful death. I can make that statement because I lived the experience with her. I was one of her closest companions on the journey. Hers was a death of choice. She had that choice because she was terminally ill, mentally competent, and a resident of the state of Oregon. I wish to bring you details of what it is like to die with end-of-life choices. In the beginning of Nancy's journey, it was evident that her body was simply not responding in ways that had been the norm for her. She was a healthy woman in her mid-50s who lived intentionally. She had studied good health practices. She had consumed nutritionally appropriate foods for decades. She exercised regularly. I will never forget standing at the train station and watching her walk toward me, watching my always healthy younger sister moving slowly because she was dragging her right leg. Nancy sought numerous ways in which to discover what was happening to her body. She had a high regard for Eastern medicine. She consulted a physician who was also a naturopath. She was given a preliminary diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. A year later, however, a very thorough MRI of her brain showed no evidence, no lesions of MS. Ultimately, it was determined that ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, which can often mask as MS, was the reason she was losing the ability to walk and for her muscles to work normally. Our family did what many families do. We came together to support our Nancy in her journey. We were joined by close friends. We formed a team who assisted Nancy as her ability to physically move and to care for her own needs became increasingly difficult. From the beginning, when she was dragging her right leg and losing the use of her right hand, things progressed to needing a walker and wheelchair. She taught herself to use her left hand to eat. Her speech began to change as the muscles weakened. Eventually, she was not able to move her extremities hardly at all. She was dependent on others for everything. What didn't change radically was her overall demeanor, her desire to do everything possible to make her days reasonably enjoyable. She persisted with her desire to laugh, to find joy in each day, to see humor as an additional medication. I brought Nancy to Vermont in August 2007 while she was still somewhat able to walk. She had lived in Middlebury before, from 1980 to 1989. She's actually the reason that I live here. I came to visit and stayed. Her 2 children were born here. She had friends of long standing in the area. I became her caregiver for the better part of a year, and I was able to do this because I had chosen to retire that year, and because my family, my friends, and her friends helped us. The diagnosis of ALS, a terminal disease, came during the winter of 2008. We met with one of New England's top ALS specialists. I was with her in the examining room in Burlington. When the doctor informed her the tests that had been done affirmed a diagnosis of ALS, Nan looked up from the wheelchair, not missing a beat, and asked him, "Do you have another menu I could choose from?" She knew she didn't want what was being offered. She was completely aware of what lay ahead for her. Our very serious conversations regarding her life path now became those of an approaching death, rather than getting beyond the restrictions she had been experiencing. As her health declined further, she returned to Oregon, where she had been living previously, in order to be near her son, Winter, and her daughter, Aslan. We, as a family team, managed to find a small rental house located only 2 blocks from her son's home. My 2 sisters and I flew in on a rotating basis, joining Winter and Aslan and others in caring for her. Nancy was very aware of the death with dignity law in Oregon. She was living a challenging existence, a confinement within the body that did not work. She was clear in her desire to be able to decide when enough was enough. She met with a neurologist in January 2009 who determined that she was within 6 months of dying. This qualified her for hospice care. Nancy and the doctor discussed use of the Death with Dignity Act. Caregivers from Serenity Hospice were wonderful. They bathed Nancy 3 times a week. The hospice nurse came regularly. Nancy received a massage every week. She also had acupuncture. Michael, with his harp, would come weekly to share an hour of beautiful music with her. The ALS chapter assisted us with special needs to help keep her comfortable. In March, the initial contact was made with Compassion and Choices of Oregon. This agency oversees the process for the state health department so that all requirements are followed legally. Nancy was seen by a second doctor. This doctor would write the prescription for the barbiturate. We were visited several times by a volunteer nurse from Compassion and Choices who helped us understand the process Nan would experience in order to die. Nancy was comforted by knowing she had the opportunity to end the pain she suffered through, the challenges she lived every moment. Nancy was declining further. She knew clearly it was time to bring an end to her life. She chose Sunday, April 19th, as the date for her death. Nan was also clear about certain things she wished to do. She dictated a farewell email message to be sent to family and friends. We made a final trip to the coast so that she could be by the ocean one last time. We visited a tulip farm with multiple acres of her favorite flowers in bloom. We helped her go through her possessions as she decided who she wished to have various pieces of jewelry, scarves, and other personal items. We were busy, we were sad, we were happy together. Emotions were in abundance. Her former husband, Edward, arrived to be present with their children. The weather became sunny and warm. All of Portland seemed to be filled with spring blooms. Nancy had a certain radiance and vigor. The day before her death, she shared with me in her extremely compromised speech that she had decided she would like to be in the backyard the following day. She wished to die outdoors, surrounded by the beauty of spring. I've been overseeing many of the details, many of the preparations. I told her I thought we could definitely do that without too much difficulty. I knew we could move the futon outside. I just wasn't sure I could guarantee the weather the next day. But that Saturday dinner, that evening before her death, was a final meal together with family and friends on the deck in the backyard. Each of us so aware of what the following day would bring. We helped her get ready for bed. Each of those present said a loving good night. And when it was just the 2 of us, I read her the many email messages that had come that day. We cried and then took further moments to say our deep farewells to one another. Sunday morning came in with bright sunshine. We ate blackberry pie together, as it was Nan's choice to make her last bit of food, a piece of berry pie. She had to have some food in her stomach along with the anti-nausea medication. The large park nearby, an old-growth forest area, was a favorite of Nan's. We all went for a walk before returning to the house to begin the final stages of the process. Time and the beauty of the green grass and tall evergreen trees allowed Nan a special stroll with her children and family and friends. Her spirit was so present in all the decisions that were made for that last day. The backyard was ready with flowers. The futon and chairs were placed in a circle. Michael arrived with his harp to play special music. Linda, the nurse from Compassion and Choices, and another volunteer witness were present to help us with the final preparations. The barbiturate capsules were opened, not swallowed. They were opened and the powder stirred into the applesauce for Nan to swallow when she chose. A very dear friend of Nan's did a loving ritual of washing Nan's feet. I was so aware of the presence of love surrounding us. We all spoke of our joy in ways that expressed how connected we were in this life and would remain so. Each of us had moments of farewell that felt and were beautiful. Nancy swallowed the applesauce when she was ready and slipped into a deep coma within 5 minutes. We sat on and around the perimeter of the futon, continuing to speak to her, while the lovely music of the harp played. Winter and Aslan were on either side of her. Edward and I were next to them. It took Nancy more than 2 hours for her heart to stop, because that organ of her body had always been strong. She was healthy in that respect. During that time together, it became very hot, and we decided to move it inside. Her son, Winter, picked her up, and as he carried her inside, he said softly, "Mom, it's okay for you to go now." She was gone by the time he placed her on her bed. Nan's suffering had ended on her terms. Hers was a death of choice because she was a resident of Oregon. Her choice was completely understood by all who loved her. Our mother, 89 at the time, was totally supportive. She had seen the health decline. She knew there was no cure. She did not want her daughter to suffer further. Nancy shared her life with us. She shared her death with us. She gave us the gift of her life. We saw her courage. We saw her joy in being able to make a choice. She lives in our hearts with all the joy that we could possibly have regarding her choice. Our grief as a family is bearable. We are comforted by the beautiful death that was hers. I ask you to craft a bill that clearly defines the process, that includes specific safeguards, that guarantees the individual suffering from a terminal illness the right to choose. As a resident of the state of Vermont, I want that right of choice.